over to video number 2 now, carrying on talking about the relationship between non-verbal learning disability and Asperger's. Some clinicians say that executive functioning is a primary deficit, but then others say that it's not a primary deficit and that it's only more common in severe cases. Certainly in my case, I do have executive functioning problems. Now, Asperger's syndrome, interestingly, shows the opposite pattern to classic autism. In Asperger's syndrome, there are verbal strengths and weaknesses in performance. This has been conceptualised as a form of non-verbal learning disability. So Asperger's syndrome is conceptualised as a form of non-verbal learning disability, bearing in mind that non-verbal learning disabilities describe a cluster of syndromes that are related but also show differences. And Asperger's syndrome could be seen as a form of non-verbal learning disability that particularly impacts social skills, where social problems is the main area of non-verbal difficulty. And depending on the individual, there may also be more wider problems in visual spatial processing and everything else, or there might not be. In my case, I have all of those difficulties, the social plus the wider non-verbal learning disabilities talked about by Byron Walk, which also includes the visual spatial problems as well. Asperger's shares 20 out of 21 similarities with non-verbal learning disability more broadly, so it's very similar. Stephen Bauer has said it is not at all clear that Asperger's syndrome is just a milder form of autism or that the conditions are linked by anything more than their broad clinical similarities. So again, if Asperger's is radically different to classic autism and only superficially similar, then really we should treat it as a separate continuum and stop constantly comparing it to classic autism. It makes no sense to describe it as a mild form of classic autism if it's a different condition with its own set of strengths and weaknesses. Asperger's syndrome can be seen as an extreme or very severe form of non-verbal learning disability. It also says here that Asperger's people do not often feel the normal range of emotions and that they have difficulty with experiencing normal social relationships. Whereas in non-verbal learning disability that occurs without Asperger's syndrome, NLDers can have normal emotions, but they are inept in expressing them and recognising them in others. So Asperger's is a bit more extreme because they do not feel the normal range of emotions. That's never talked about these days, is it, in the PC world we operate in, but that's the truth. And yeah, and it says here, Asperger's has greater social problems than in NLD more broadly. NLD's ineptness is mainly due to the inability to read non-verbal communication. Whereas in Asperger's you also have the additional theory of mind problems. I have both issues, because I also have Asperger's, so I have a theory of mind difficulties combined with those visual spatial problems, so I'm doubly screwed, basically. It also says that there are differences between Asperger's and non-verbal learning disabilities more broadly defined, and that many people with Asperger's actually respond well to visuals and diagrams and are visual learners, while NLDers need everything explained in words. So there are some subtle differences there between Asperger's and other forms of NLD, even though Asperger's actually is very, very similar in many other ways. And this is where it gets a bit confusing and ambiguous. I would say that for myself, I am a multisensory learner, in that I do need things visual, but I also need things auditory. I actually need both. If it's just auditory and it's lowness, it doesn't cut it. I'll forget the information very quickly unless it's written down. I need things explained very clearly. If it's just done orally, I will very quickly lose the information or get distracted. But if it's just written down, I will need to make sense of it through talking aloud as well. So I'm actually a multisensory learner, and so I do learn visually, but I also need it augmented with auditory as well, essentially. So I'm basically both, but that might reflect simply the fact that I have both Asperger's and NVLD more broadly. So maybe that's why I actually am a multisensory learner, because I have both profiles. Also, interestingly, by the way, it says here that Asperger's is always a clinically significant impairment in social occupational functioning, whereas non-verbal learning disability is mostly, but that's simply because Asperger's is seen as a bit more severe. But they both have good rote memory. And impaired executive function is nearly always there in broader NVLD, but is only mostly there in Asperger's. So impaired executive functioning is very common in Asperger's, but it's not the main feature of Asperger's, whereas impaired executive functioning is the main feature of NVLD more broadly. But yeah, as I say, they are so very similar. This might just be academic, the differences. It might not actually be real. It might just reflect different processes, different profiles within Asperger's. There was another article called Asperger's and NVLD, How These Two Disorders Related to Each Other by David Dinklage, PhD. But I'm going to move over to video number 3. I've got so much to talk about here, so I'm going to have to move over to another video now to talk about these extra articles. Moving over to video number 3.